having bad reviews, it can be a massive reason people will not want to work for you or join your business. And I know that Anneri, you were researching quite a bit about businesses that are really passionate about the gender pay gap, and it's all over the media, and people are more interested in working on this. Anneri, can you talk a little bit more about the different businesses you were mentioning? I thought this was a really interesting topic.
Yeah, Stace, I think one of the first things that we really need to just say as well is it's going to be really hard for a woman to be able to ask for equal pay if she has no idea what her male counterparts are earning. So that's one of the things, because it's sometimes really treated as a closely guarded secret, and women are obviously the ones that suffer the most. But to a big degree, what happens within that is that people talk. Let's put it as it is. So the same way that you find out, usually what happens is the reputation really, like, people run with it. And I think one of the biggest things that we can think of is people that are interested in a business looking from the outside is, if you want to work for a company, you're going to want to work for a company that aligns with your values, right? And as a woman, it's important for us to know that we're stepping into something where this company aligns with my values, and they value my skill set, what I've built up over the years, that enables me to be able to earn a fair salary. So I just quickly want to see, Darren, would you like to invite someone up to speak?
No, that's fine. Monica's just messaged me. She's on another call, so she might join a bit later on. So please carry on.
Okay, perfect. So I think one of the things when we start going into this, obviously, Stace, is I think company culture plays a big role, right, in terms of the message that gets sent out there, in terms of what you value as well. So for this, before you join a company, you need to look at that company and say, is this something that you value? So if I can direct a question at Kam, Kam, how would you say that a company culture would influence the pay gap? So I know that's quite a sticky question, but do you think that it plays a role? Do you think that it has a major influence in what's happening?
Absolutely. I'll tell you one thing, right? When it comes to company culture, it's not a silo issue, especially when it comes to the pay gap. The pay gap is a result of certain thinking, which ultimately manifests into the salary deficit that we are currently facing and seeing in multiple spaces. So I think the most important thing is, if you get to the point where you're able to change the culture, it will ultimately change the thinking, which will ultimately ripple into other areas of the company. So I think from that perspective, I would definitely say that culture is a very, very crucial issue.
And Kam, if you don't mind me asking, so what do you think are the things that kind of make or break that company culture, the things that they need to focus on directly related to the pay gap issue within the organization?
One of the key things is setting clear diversity targets. I think it's very crucial for leadership, rather leaders who want to strengthen their culture. And I say this because if women are to advance within a gender inequality space, sorry, I just lost my train of thought because there's a lot of drilling here. Please excuse me. But as I was saying, if women are to advance, right, gender equality must be a strategic priority in order for women to ascend into leadership roles. And when women ascend into these leadership roles, it creates a ripple effect by ensuring that innovation, creativity, and that there's a fertile environment for diverse ideas. And I think one of the key things when it comes to this is ensuring that women are thoroughly prepared for these leadership roles and not just imposing these roles onto them simply because there's a particular quota that needs to be reached. I think in certain instances, companies really do feel the pressure to fill in a quota instead of filling in an actual vacancy because they feel the pressures of not having female leadership within top positions. And by virtue of them grooming themselves grooming the women within the workplace, putting in thorough succession planning, talent mapping, and understanding where women need to, not even women, but employees in general need to be developed in order for them to take on more senior roles, it would better benefit the organization.
Definitely, Cam. I agree with you that leadership, really everything rises and falls on leadership within the company. So I'd like to give Nene the opportunity just to speak. We're going to give some of our audience members the opportunity just to add on.
Thank you for the opportunity. So there are two areas I would like to address when it comes to closing the gender pay gap. And one is as it comes to recruiters like you guys that are in Talent in the Cloud. I think you play a major role when it comes to closing that gender gap. So when you are, head hunting the candidate and you find out that candidate is a woman, I think it's in your place to be able to tell the organization you're recruiting for, give the best value for this person. You should, sometimes women, because we've been conditioned to sell ourselves short, you know, we might say, oh, this is the amount we're expecting in terms of our salary. And that you have an inside information on what the candidate is worth should be able to help the candidate say, oh no, even if this is what you're expecting, because of our research in these fields, because we know that people in this position earn X amount of funds, this is what you should present. And even as a recruiter, you now go back to the organization and say, look, this candidate should be paid this amount of money because this is what they earn. So as far as I'm concerned, you play a major role in closing that gender gap as recruiters. Then another thing I would like to say about closing the gap is for women to be able to speak up more for themselves and should be able to advocate for themselves more. And that can only come by, doing their research and doing training. So my name is Nene and I'm done speaking. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nene. I think I couldn't agree more with every point you just made. Talent in the Cloud, we do have this. This is a passion and mission of ours, and there are different solutions we're currently brainstorming to see the ways we can navigate and support this movement. One of them being moving away from pay secrecy, so having businesses be more open about their budget that they're having, and in turn going to candidates and figuring out what they actually deserve to be paid and presenting that to clients versus going with their current salary. Because what we realized through brainstorm sessions is that once you as a candidate are currently being underpaid, it's really, really difficult to then make that big jump, even though you deserve that amount. So as recruiters, we're really trying to, one, educate as many people as we can, our clients, just the industry as a whole, as well as just really focusing on presenting candidates at their worth.
Thanks, Stacey. Thank you. James, are you available to chat for a second?
Yeah, briefly. Yeah. Go ahead. Sorry, guys.
Yeah.
I was just getting back out the car and back at home, but proud to say this is now a conversation streaming out on Twitter Spaces, on YouTube, and on Facebook Live. So great to have so many women on stage talking about this issue. I feel humbled by the presence and delighted to be part of the conversation.
Great, thanks, James. I don't know if you want to do a quick room reset. Perhaps Anneri, if you, James, do you want to do a quick room reset? You can mention a little bit more, or probably a bit more articulately than I can about the club.
Yeah, happy to do so. Look, welcome everyone. If you're new to the room or new to Clubhouse, welcome to the Fintech and Payments Club. As Darren mentioned earlier, we are a top 40 club ranked by members, all volunteers, giving back to the community. Really, this whole point of the club is really to answer any questions about money that you're afraid to ask. We try and make it an open and inclusive club for all. And if you want to give us a follow, you can just click the greenhouse icon on top of the page. And anyone who wants to become a member, you're more than welcome to become a member. Simply just go to our website, fintechandpayments.club, click register, let us know a bit more about you. Unfortunately, Clubhouse doesn't tell us anything about our followers and members. We don't know where you live. We don't know which country you're in, which time zone you're in. We don't know what your interests are. So if you register with our website, we learn a little bit more about our potential audience. And that way we can put on more relevant rooms. So please feel free to do so. It's fantastic to have so many people with us today. If you think someone else would really benefit from this conversation, please consider pinging them into the room. The plus sign at the bottom of your page on the app is a way that you can introduce this topic and maybe drag more people into the room that you think would benefit from the conversation. And if you have a spare moment, please do check out Slido, sli.do, on your internet browser. By doing so, you can not only vote on the live polls we have running right now, but you can also pose a question there. If you're shy, you don't want to be on stage or in a place that's noisy, or if you just want to do it anonymously, you can use Slido for that. And if you want to upvote on someone else's questions, we'll get to those in the second half of the session. We'll take those from the top that have got the most votes. Last of all, I would just say Clubhouse has been a magical and serendipitous experience for me. And it's mostly because I've been able to make some very firm friendships in a very short space of time. And that has been simply by browsing the room, clicking on other people's profile photos, reading a bit more about them on their profile, and then clicking follow. And if you haven't had the opportunity to update your profile yet, please do so. It's a really easy way to get to know other people. And what you find is people that hang out in the same room, it's probably because you're kindred spirits and you probably want to hang out in a room again soon. So that's it from me, Darren. Thanks ever so much for the opportunity. Great to have so many people with us today. Looking forward to the rest of the conversation. Please don't be shy in raising a hand if you'd like to join us on stage, or again, feel free to pose a question on Slido. Back to you.
James, thanks so much. There's loads of questions coming through, quite a few questions coming through on Slido, so we're going to get to those during the second half. I'm going to pass back to Anneri.
Great. So I'd like to give some of our ladies in the room a chance to just share their opinions or their thoughts or ask a question. So I hope that I'm pronouncing your name correctly, but Anuradha, do you mind sharing with us?
That was actually an accurate pronunciation. Thanks, Anneri. Thanks, Darren. Couldn't agree more with what all has been discussed so far. I just wanted to share my experience and perspective. So, while pay gap is a massive issue, and it's because of a web of systemic challenges, right? But a couple of points that I would like to touch upon. So, there is a World Economic Forum report, which it's an annual report that talks about pay gaps. I think the latest report, it said that at the current rate, it will take around 135 to 136 years to achieve just pay parity. If you talk about economic parity, it's going to take like 260 years for men and women to be on the same page, right? So it's a massive challenge, and while we have done a lot, but I think we need to speed up the process, because more than 100 years, that's something which sounds a little unacceptable to me. And a couple of my experiences on this topic, sharing a few of them. So a couple of reasons why a pay gap exists, right? One is just the fact that we have a very small representation. If you look at the representation at management level or board level, it's probably, I don't know, my numbers could be a little dated, but around 17-18%. What that means is that you don't have enough people at that level. We need to achieve a critical mass. So even though I'm against the concept of quota in general, but we need to achieve a certain critical mass, and that's when we will start seeing more women in leadership team who can drive the culture of hiring more women, and which would gradually, bridge that gap. And the second big reason is psychological experiences, and that's a massive topic, correct? For instance, things like most of the unpaid work, which is basically the household chores, are done by women. This is a global average, correct? Every country might have a different experience, but that's the global average. What that leads to is the current stereotypical image of who a successful leader would be, that needs to evolve. A successful leader is no more someone who could just pack their bags overnight and relocate to a different country, right? So unless we bring that maturity, we won't be able to break the barrier of getting more women in the leadership roles. Or even, certain things like, and this is more common in patriarchal societies, where people assume that, okay, men are the main primary bread earners, so they should get the higher packages, versus women probably not so much. Not true. And this is the kind of awareness that's happening, but we need to put it on the next gear. And also another thing that helps us personally is treating the topic of gender diversity, gender pay gap in the same way that we would treat any topic of business. When we are running a business, we have this roadmaps, we have a plan, we have dashboards looking at every number. I think that's how we need to talk about gender as well, including diversity and pay gap. We need to treat it as objectively as we can and not look at just averages. Aggregate numbers can skew the real picture. Drill down by segment, drill down by your functions, drill down by your countries, and then you'll start seeing the real picture, because as they say, the devil lies in the detail, right? So that's something that helps. Look at the exact numbers. And the second thing is, we know that the pay gap exists. So if you have to say that, when you're hiring someone, the salary is X percentage above your current salary, what we are doing is we're actually increasing the pay gap. So probably we need to relook at these things, that, how do we ensure that the gap is not increasing, and B, what are the mechanisms that we can use to to bridge that further. Yeah, just a few things from me, that's all.
All right. Well, I think that's a very, very good point, and I think that you've touched on a couple of really, really good points here. And I know that Stacey will definitely be able to add a couple of things from just a business perspective in terms of audits and things that you can do to be able to see whether or not you are in perfect alignment with what needs to happen. So, firstly, the first point that you made on small representation is definitely true. I mean, the statistics on how many women are in leadership positions are quite shocking, to be honest. And we cannot necessarily expect things to change in a sense where it doesn't flow from the top, because the decision makers in terms of the change, the power lies with them, right? So we can make small changes. People with recruiters, like, we can fight for people's rights in terms of seeing that there's a need, or somebody's been unfairly paid, and show the statistics. But I think one of the really, really interesting topics that you mentioned as well is culture perspective. And I think in a lot of countries, some are definitely more progressive than others, women are still seen as a secondary earner within the household. A lot of times women are required to take care of their households, take care of their families, plus be that businesswoman. And people tend to, within interviews and with the process of hiring as well, they go, how are you going to be able to balance that work-life balance? So they are hesitant in a degree, and I'm not saying this is a generalized thing, but a lot of people feel like they can't be on that C-suite level and still be able to make those decisions. So I think this comes back to what Kam also said about culture within the company, being able to change the way that you're thinking about what it takes to be in a position of leadership within your company, and really change the way we think. And like you said, the devil really lies in the details. So we need to relook at the facts. And I think what women can do regarding the gender pay gap, right, is there comes a time where we're going to have to come up and really be able to fight for the things that you can fight for, and look at what you can do as well. And I think standing up for yourself in the areas that you can, for example, going for an interview, being in that place of negotiation, it can be quite a tricky subject. And I'm not saying that all women struggle with this, but to a large degree, culture does play a role, like you said. And women are often taught to be submissive, to soften up their approach is really something that's common, to smile all the time. And I think the women in the room can probably have a little bit of a chuckle about that, because you understand exactly what I'm referring to. So the concept of that gentle approach, it can make it more difficult when it comes to negotiation as well. And because it's such an uncomfortable topic for any gender, it's a sticky topic to talk about, especially in an interview and when you're going into that. Stace, I'm not sure if you would like to add something on the business side of that.
Yeah, sure. Anuradha, you mentioned the number 100 years to get us to close the gender pay gap, and my team can attest to this. I am like I shoot for the stars. I'm like, no, this needs to be solved now. And so when I think about the problem at hand, I'm like, what can we do to make that time shorter? Anneri, you mentioned pay audits. I think that is definitely step number one, is to be just aware if there is a problem in your business. I know that speaking to a couple of our clients, they do pay audits. Some of the businesses actually are on the right track. They have great statistics at hand, but maybe some businesses aren't aware of theirs. And there are multiple different ways, I think, to go about this. Something that I recently came across, and it's really popular in the public sector, are pay grades. So this is when you divide, you can say level of seniority, your education, length of time in the field, and something that I thought was very important is your performance. So you kind of have a number associated with all of those, and you then automatically get put into a salary bracket. And I think this is such an excellent idea, and I know this is really used widely in the public sector, but I think that the private sector can take a page out of this book and start implementing stuff like this, because if you analyze your data and you see that there's a gap, it's really hard to make that difference. But if you roll out something like pay grades, I think it could be quite a quick fix. Anneri, I know that you have quite a lot of background on what candidates can do because you manage candidates every day. But if you have a candidate that's struggling with maybe asking for more money in an interview or feeling like they aren't being awarded what they deserve, what can candidates do in that situation?
Thanks, Stace. I think that's a really, really good question, because at the end of the day, I think it's important to know that the decision makers are the people who influence that, but we still have a responsibility in where we sit, whether or not we're going to accept it or not. So for you as a woman going into that first interview, and I think it can be daunting enough. Interviews are daunting enough by its own, but the most tricky thing for any gender, like I mentioned, is that salary negotiation. And the first thing that you need to do is you need to do your research, because if you go into a conversation and it comes to your gross salary. So firstly, there are a couple of countries in the world that completely, they don't ask you your base salary. They don't ask you your gross salary. It's a taboo topic, especially in America as well. But what we deal with here in Africa is it's very much common. So people just ask you what your gross salary is, and then they kind of work out your increase from there. So what happens if in your previous position or a position down the line, and that kind of rolls over, right? Because now 3 jobs ago you were paid 20K less than you actually should have been paid, and you keep being offered an increase on your previous salary, then there's a massive gender pay gap. So how are we going to bridge that? And in terms of getting to that interview stage, and firstly, when they ask you for your gross salary from a recruiter perspective or from a company perspective, right? Firstly, I'd just like to point out that it is not legally obligated for you to give your gross, right? And if you can explain why, I guarantee most likely people are going to ask you, but why not? Why are you uncomfortable? And I think this is a really great opportunity to be able to negotiate firstly, and then also to educate, right? So what you need to do in this point is extremely important. You need to be able to prove why you were underpaid. You can't necessarily just go, it's the gender pay gap. So I would go, let's say that uncomfortable question gets asked. Firstly, if you don't feel strong enough in the moment to be able to negotiate or give a solid answer, I would say answer as something like, I'm not comfortable to give a figure without giving it some thought first, but I'm sure that you're going to give me something that is fair and something that is market related, right? And then going back, if let's say you do give your gross salary and they ask you why you feel that you're underpaid, right? Then you go, have you heard of the gender pay gap? And that's where the opportunity comes, and that's where you can show your research. So there are actually a couple of tools that are there. There are a couple, but if I can just give you guys one that you can just check your market value, because I think that's one of the first things. Do your research, check your market value and what it is that you're supposed to be earning, and that means taking your skills into consideration, your degree, how many years you've worked. All of these things kind of play a role, because you also can't necessarily compare yourself to a male counterpart that has 10 years prior experience to you. So if you can do that research and you have your ducks in a row, definitely it's going to be a lot easier to be able to win that, I wouldn't say that argument, but to make your point. And then, so just quickly, that tool is www.salaryexpert.com. So that's it. But I just quickly wanted to give, I wonder if I'm pronouncing this correctly, but Shetna, an opportunity just to ask your question or to share your thoughts as well.
Hi there. Thanks for calling me up. Yeah, sorry, my battery went out, so I left and came back, so I may have missed some things, but I just wanted to just comment on some things that were said. One, I think that Another talked about it at quite strategic and systemic level, but just from a more, I guess, operational standpoint, I'm in HR, I have been in for 20 years, and I see how this plays out. And I think one of the things that would really help women is where they've got some support from recruiters, but also businesses not looking at a previous salary in making their decision on what to pay people. It should be looking at the market worth. And I find that in my experience, there's certain groups, women being one of them, probably ethnic minorities or minority groups being the other, where they don't tend to negotiate quite as hard on salary, and so they end up coming in and almost, I would say, in some instances, so grateful to have the job that they don't push so hard, whereas other groups might push harder on that. And we need to put more in place. And I think from a HR, like internal HR standpoint, from a recruiter standpoint, and also just from a general awareness around this, to try and make sure that we're paying them what they're worth, not what they think they might be worth often, because it might be that they're undervaluing their skill sets. And it's been covered by other people before me, but I'm just thinking of ways in which we can practically help with that, because they won't negotiate. And I know that in the US they have, I think that there is something in place that says that you can't really ask somebody what they used to be paid and use that as a measure of what they should be paid now. It was for certain groups. It was a few years ago that came about. And so I think that is one thing that will be helpful. There was somebody that commented about quotas and bringing women, not being force-fitting women into roles. And I think I personally have mixed feelings around this. I agree that we shouldn't be putting women into roles where they don't have the skills. But if there is a skills gap that can be developed, I don't see why we shouldn't be putting women in to act as role models and bringing other people up through the ranks. I'm sorry, but I have worked with plenty of men who have not been operating at 100%, but have managed to hold on to roles for years. And I've also had people recruited in, I would say men and women, but because we're talking about the gender pay gap, who have not had the full skill set and still get recruited into roles and get paid a good amount for it. So I just think that if we really want to try and bridge this gap that Anurada's talking about, which is quite a task, we have to make decisions like that. And I know I work, I know people in different sectors in the banking sector who work, their friends who've said that, some women have been brought in that don't necessarily have that skill gap, the skill set, but they have a different skill set that's complementary. Yes, it causes some discussion, but I just don't know what the solution is when we don't have these women in the pipeline. And we talk about succession planning, but if they're not in the pipeline, we have to find other ways of getting them into the system and having them as mentors, role models to bring other people up. Anyway, I'm Chetna and I'm done speaking. Thank you.
Everything you said, I think that's so valuable, and it's definitely something we should start implementing. I would have a question for you. Do you think that businesses should start upskilling women that are already employed, or should we be employing people and then upskilling them? What are your thoughts on that, Chetna?
I've been in organisations where where there's been a gap, we've offered some certain leadership roles to women, because of course, like the gender pay gap in the UK talks about salary, but it's also about the bonuses. And when bonuses are just assigned to people in the senior roles, the pay gap looks even worse for organisations when you've got. So I would say it should be happening internally, where you've got somebody who's got high potential and you can nurture them, and by giving them external mentors, by giving them additional support, whatever training, coaching, whatever it is that we think they need to get them there. And it's the same with external candidates. Sometimes you hire for potential. We often do hire for potential, and giving people the right support to try and get them, I think, is valuable for the organisation, because women often bring a different way of thinking. We know that the science shows that, by having mixed gender leadership teams, you're raising the IQ, you're changing the thinking. You've got more innovation. You've got, there's so many stats out there, so much science out there to kind of talk about the benefits of diversity. So I think it's a combination of both. We do both. We often have, and I was challenged around this quota thing, because I think I had a different stance a few years ago when I was working in a large fintech organisation, and the head of D&I challenged me and actually said, we've had people, we've had men in the business who don't necessarily perform, but nobody talks about that. So I'm now an advocate for that.
I love that. I have one more question. I'm so sorry. I want to pick your brain. One, this is something you sound really passionate about and knowledgeable on, being in the HR department. How would you respond to a group of people, let's just say a male counterpart who's up for the same role, who's more skilled for the position, and then you feel that you'd rather give it to a female who isn't as skilled, but you really would like to upskill? How would you respond to that situation?
I think it just depends on the scenario. I think it depends on your gender mix in the organisation. If you at a senior level have agreed as part of your objectives and the strategy that you want to bring some more gender balance in place, it will depend on a number of factors. But I think that I would assess it holistically. From the fact that not only is it just about the job, but it's about the fact that that person will potentially be a role model to other people. So they're contributing other things to the culture, not just the job. So, and it would depend on what the skills gap is between the two. I think you have to assess it holistically. The only way we can change it is by doing that, because the talent pool will have mostly men in it. So I think that you're always going to be up against that challenge, that there are going to be more qualified men out there, from a ratio point of view. And the only way for us to change that is to bring more women in, and so that they can then, bring something else into the organisation, but role model, so that we can get more of a mix in the talent pool. And you'll be more experienced in that, because you'll see more of the candidates coming through. I'm just voicing it from I'm a HR consultant. I mean, I'm embedded in different organisations, so I see it in different organisations and industries. So, there's some sectors like, I've worked in creative sectors where you've got more women, or some Marcom sectors where you've got more women, but it just depends on the sector. So that would be my response to that. I think you have to look at it holistically. I don't think you force fit. I think you have to look at the whole thing and look at where the organisation truly wants to go, not just talks about, but really wants to go.
Thanks, Jen. I thought I'd just pop in here. There's a couple of questions on Slido which I think are certainly relevant to this part of the conversation. And one I think we've touched on briefly on a couple of occasions. And one of the questions was, in many countries, asking for salary details is illegal. How can countries adopt this policy? I just want to broaden that maybe just a touch. To the anonymous person who posted that, I'm just going to expand on it a little bit. Should this be down to the country, down to sort of regulators and policymakers, or should some of the the major, well, we're talking about fintech and payments, so the financial services companies, should they lead by example? Stacey, do you got a view on that, or James, if you've got a view on that? I know you may be on a call, but if anyone has an opinion.
Oh, this is such a difficult question, because I don't think there's one person responsible, right? I don't think it should fall in just the regulators or the businesses. I think that it's going to take a lot of different people to come into play. But touching on the topic we were talking earlier of how long this is going to take to close the gender gap, if regulators did put something in place, I think that would be the most instrumental change, versus fintechs just making some sort of agreement that we won't do it. Because speaking internally, we know that some businesses are for it, some businesses aren't. So it's really going to be tough to make this change unless everybody's on board, because if you have a portion that's not, it's definitely going to be a tricky situation.
I agree.
Can I
Chandler,
just add
please.
something? Yeah.
Yeah.
Look, when we had Equal Pay Act come in, when we had legislation in the 70s, around this, and we've had the Equality Act, unfortunately, it's taken things like this to get more attention in this space. And so I think if we left it to organisations, it then goes down to individual decision making. It needs to be a system change, I would say, which is what I believe has happened in the US. And, they've done it on the back of research that's shown that these groups actually just don't negotiate, or already starting on a lower salary. And somebody again said earlier that, once you start on a lower salary, it's really hard to catch up. Because the question that you always get asked as you move from one job to another is, what was your last salary? So I do think that there should be some legislation. I personally think there should be some legislation around it if we're really serious about this.
Yeah, I
That's my
agree.
opinion. It's
No,
not. I mean, obviously, it counts for not very much, but
no,
it's
no.
just.
Listen, I think we're all in agreement with you. It's something we've been working hard with some of our clients to educate. Might be a strong word, but to talk to them about, the basis of someone's current salary is not really relevant to what you're bringing them in to do. What value can they bring to your organisation? So. Thank you, Chetna. Thank you for that. I'm going to ask another question. So if you thought that one was challenging, wait till you hear this one. So with more remote teams and less face-to-face interaction, could talent be harder to identify unless they choose to self-identify things like gender? And this is open to anyone. So anyone that's got a view on this, feel free.
When they say identify, is that
Yeah.
like from a talent identifying high performing talent, or identifies in how people identify?
Just how to identify talent. I think that's where that question was. So I'll just repeat it just for clarity's sake. With more remote teams and less face-to-face interaction, could talent be much harder to identify unless they choose to self-identify things like gender? It's a tough one.
So, Darren, if I'm allowed to weigh in on that,
Sure.
I think it is a really, really difficult decision. I think it would help to a degree, right? But I don't think it's the most practical solution. Just in terms of the interview process and being able to bring somebody on board, I think it would be quite difficult to do. And this is very strongly my opinion. So I think, to a degree, if you think about it, it kind of alleviates the problem where people would discriminate between gender, right? For a while. Because I think it's very difficult to be able to hide your gender all the time, firstly. And secondly, just in my opinion, the first question that comes up to me is why do we need to do that? And even though it solves a degree to the problem, it still highlights a bigger problem for me. And that the point, like that society and companies are at the point where you would need to implement something for it to be fair. And for me, in an ideal world, I would much rather have the heart of the issue be sorted out, and the company that I am joining would be valuable. Because personally, I wouldn't want to be working for a company that doesn't value gender diversity and also celebrates who you are, right? Whoever you identify as, or see yourself as if you're proud of being a woman or proud of being a man, but having that comfort that you're part of a fair company, for me means much more than having to kind of hide myself during the first interview process in order to get a fair salary.
Yeah, and I would agree with that. Look, I'm all for human-centered organisations, and so for me, for people to be able to show up authentically from the point of entry into an organisation so that they can flourish